fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice.
Greetings world. We are on DK. In our research of the other hand of the elite, we will be looking at Asia. As a whole, Asia holds over 4,478,806,000 people. We have already covered some things on China in our previous video Enter the Dragon. We will not repeat that information, since we like to start at the beginning of things. Let us go back to 3400 BC when opium was cultivated in Southwest Asia. Sumeria was the name the elite tribe went by at this time, also known as Pannonians, Illyrians, Draco, Dalmatian, Naphtali and more. Their god was Anu. Many of you may notice how similar this image is to so many others. They called opium Hulgil, which means joy plant. Its cultivation spread along the Silk Road, the routes from the Mediterranean, Turkey, Greece, Asia and finally to China. The elite changed their names as often as their camping locations within their borders. They are restless people. They have never known peace. They continued in their trade of opium as well as oil with the Ashokator tribes in Egypt and beyond, as they were and still are their best sources of wealth. They traded and shipped their opium out of what we now call the Golden Triangle, which is still the same opium business. Same routine, same profit today. The Golden Triangle produces an unmeasurable amount of opium. Most of what is grown and harvested is never distributed. Simply put, there is too much opium to go around. The average Golden Triangle manager makes $5 billion per year. This is 1/5 of sales income. Think about that a moment. Owned by the British Crown, which is the Rothschild family, Hong Kong is still the main money transfer station, with banks and organizations including Jardine Matheson, Charterhouse Jeffett, Swire. But back to BC, the Indus Valley civilization in India was at its peak during 2300 to 1700 BC, but was around long before that, occupying the entire area of India and portions of Pakistan. The only explanation why the civilization was lost, according to archaeologists and historians, is because of a massive flood. However, scientists and archaeologists and historians are not allowed to acknowledge a flood, so they explain it as such. Tectonic plates were thrust upwards, which could have allowed water and flooding to take place. But there is no explanation why the civilization was wiped out. Most every ancient civilization has the same excuse for disappearing. But before Indus Valley died, like most, it was a highly advanced culture with a language that is still being decoded. Sir John Marshall states that the wheel vehicle seems to have originated in Central Asia. This, as we have exposed before in our documents, was where the tribes of the elite were centered before they grew and split and spread. Their tribes were well known to the others because of their use of horses and chariots. After this civilization was wiped out by catastrophe, the Aryans came from Central Asia and entered India through Afghanistan after 1500 BC, mostly a farming and nomadic culture. By 600 BC the land was highly cultivated and even grew the newly introduced rice. The Aryan tribes became priests and rulers, ordained by their blood. So the class system began. Also named caste system by the Portuguese, this is a segregation system based on bloodline. There are 3,000 castes and 25,000 subcastes in India, each related to a specific occupation. Caste not only dictates one's occupation, but dietary habits and interaction with members of other castes as well. The third I.1 typically associates with Indian women comes from this as well. Was used to label women as property and identified which class they were in. It was given on the wedding day. Now it is painted on. The peasants have always been taxed and persecuted in order to support the lavish lifestyle of luxury for the nobles and elites. Hinduism was the main religion in the area. This focuses on the worship of the cow. As we have discussed many times before, the horned animal represents Lucifer. The Hindu belief is one of karma, which is a yin-yang effect, the center of the Hegelian dialectic which the elite still use to control us all today. Action, effect, fate, problem, reaction, solution, and the reincarnation idea, which is called rebirth, a soul leaving the body and infecting another host. This happens in every occult teaching. Possession. But around 563 BC we see Gautama Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, is born. We will discuss Buddha a bit as he is so well known. Though many say there are up to 6 Buddhas, there was only ever one born who was the real human Buddha who, claiming to be nothing more than a seeker of truth, repackaged and renamed Hinduism, immortalizing himself in the cult religion, selling it as a peaceful way of life with no gods to speak of. Buddhists worship the idol of Buddha, a metal replica of a mentally incompetent human being. Buddhism eliminates the human of self and reality, leaving a weak shell, willing to go along with anything blindly so long as it does not upset the nerves, or as they call it, to not have bad karma, to not be triggered, which is simply put, the process of silencing free will in our minds. It is easy to sound smart and to make yourself seem better than others. Deception is always more appealing than reality. But we are all equal. No one is better than anyone else. That leaves us all with only one conclusion. There should be no religions or rulers, as they are created by the elite, all of whom should be deleted. Buddha was born to the king of Kapilavastu, in the foothills of the Himalayas. His mother, having died while Buddha was very young, left him to be raised by his aunt. He was raised alone and extremely sheltered with no outside influences by order of his father. Just like every other elite we have discussed before, he grew up in the appropriate conditions, entirely controlled. He was married to a princess and they had a son. The story goes that Buddha felt caged in his riches and power. Like so many of the elite poster children we see, he leaves his life of comfort to be poor and suffer. He met an unnamed monk, and from there we have the typical story of all people who give their life to a closed cult lifestyle, torturing himself as the monks, priests and Jesuits do to this day, starving himself as they all do to this day, having visions, hallucinations because of this lifestyle, just as St. Francis Assisi, Joseph Smith, Charles Darwin, Charles Russell, and so many other pawns used to create more fake religions based on Luciferian occult. All these things practiced by the Magi, the Zoroastrians, the elite through history. For those of you who missed it, most of those who lived behind walls in cults, shut off from the world, kept in a strict and controlled mindset and lifestyle. The Catholic priests and nuns, the Buddhist monks and the Dalai Lama, they live by oath. Controlled by the elite, they preyed on children. Mind control, creating the next generation of closed-minded pedo-religious soldiers. They practice Luciferianism and rituals including human sacrifice and child rape. How virtuous indeed it is to sell your soul to one they call God, as stated in 1868 and remains true today. The Papal Church, supreme in Europe, was based on ignorance, and could only be maintained while ignorance continued. The whole efforts of the clergy, therefore, have been and are directed to this one end, to keep the world in their leading strings, by crushing out the mind of the world. After leading many hermits through life, Buddha died telling his disciples to realize your own self. The truth is in your heart that will lead you to heaven. Strange thing for someone who did not believe in heaven to say. The religion is based on making yourself God, not having one. It is worship of the self, but most false prophets renounce all they do when they die. After the damage is done and the masses have been deceived, no one listens then. Buddha did not leave writings. His students and disciples wrote things down after he died. Even the monks wrote a book, in 3 parts. Of course, they started telling of other Buddhas, created many other divisions of Buddhism through that. The mainstream story is as expected filled with the stench and symbolism of the elite. When Alexander the Great conquered the area a couple hundred years later, Roman influence infected everything. We can find the details of Buddha's birth and life have been copied and taken from various Hindu and Roman stories of various idols. Now we have Buddhism throughout Asia and the world, and everyone following a different version, just as the Roman Church did with the Bible. Turn it into a religion and divide it up into cults. Most monks today, particularly in Thailand where it is a national religion, still chant in Buddha's language called Pali, similar to Sanskrit. During this time, in 550 BC, Confucius was born. The Han dynasty was based on Confucius' peaceful teachings and China thrived. The population of China in the census too had showed 57 million. Sadly, by 220 AD the emperor had become a puppet and the country had again returned to internal battles that irrevocably tore it apart. Confucius wanted to restore order to the rulers who at the time were in their separated tribes of families, constantly warring with each other. As we know, the elite family tribes in this time had reached out to most areas of the continent under many different and changing names. Some families went to India. Some went to China. Some went to Ukraine and Germany. A main line of them went to form Rome and Egypt, which we have discussed at length. The Huns attempted to invade the area we know as Ukraine, but they were run out by the now called Visigoths. They were slowly infiltrated by the Goths, as we see later, changing their name, yet again, from Pannonians to Dacians and more. In 776 BC the Wrong tribe from the west, where the tribes originated, in Pannonia, invaded the Jew region. The Jew king's power declined and the land broke up into separate states whose rulers were under one Jew king. Nobles became independent rulers and went to war. The stronger ones conquered the weaker till there were only a few left. The Li River, named after the elite bloodline of the Li family, had a canal created around 200 BC. The Ling Canal now joins the Xiang and Li Rivers, opening passage from Xi'an, Guangzhou and Shanghai. The Qin conquered its rivals and its ruler became Emperor of China in 221 AD. In 198 AD Li Juekajiran died. He was general of chariots and cavalry, director of retainers, Marquis of Chiang and Grand Marshal. By the end of his blood-soaked legacy, he was betrayed by his right-hand man and butchered along with his entire clan. In 221 the Qin dynasty, whose descendants are known today as the Li family, after 9 years of successive wars, took over every region of China and moved to outlying regions as well. They became the largest empire in history to that point. They were known for their centralized society, where every dissenter against the rule of the court was killed, tortured, or sent for forced labor, and most literature was destroyed. The people were enslaved, drafted for wars and great construction projects. Weights and measures were introduced by Emperor Qin. They kept a military officer and a civilian in command of each of the 34 areas. The Qin dynasty was a tightly centralized legalist government and imposed extremely strict legal code, tight control and crippling taxation on the people while brutally silencing opposition. Under the dynasty, 460 scholars were buried alive. Weapons were banned. The wealthy were moved to the capital to be easily controlled and protected. Costly projects like the construction of the Great Wall, a nationwide highway network, and the 8,000 life-sized exact replicas of soldiers called the terracotta soldiers, their weapons, and animals which were buried with the emperor, were carried out at the cost of harsh taxation and conscript labor. The people eventually rebelled, and then we see the Han emerge, not to be confused with the Hans from before. It is quite easy to spot the bloodline through countries and cultures and tribes. They always use the same symbols, colors, agenda. The script is always the same, only the names change. In 618, the Li family, known then as the Tang dynasty, seized power, creating the decline and collapse of the Sui Empire. The Tang dynasty lasted until the 900s. During this dynasty, Li Bai rose and became one of China's most famous poets. The emperor and founder of the Tang dynasty was Li Yuan. His daughter Princess Pingyang was said to be equally as militant as her father, having her own troops and military under her command, which was notable in those days. But let us take a look at some symbolism. We have mentioned the swastika before. It is the Asian character Wan, meaning all, used since before 300 BC. The broken cross is a sign of good luck to those in a cult. 2 golden fish symbolize absence of fear, courage, happy marriage, and fertility. The sea represents endless suffering. This is why there are many water-related symbols. The lotus flower is depicted in many colors. White, the highest color for the elite, represents purity. Pink represents the traditional Buddha. Purple is for mysticism. Red, the third highest color, for love and compassion, while blue, the second highest color, stands for wisdom. Buddha is typically depicted with a lotus. The lotus represents detachment from the world and purity. Like most symbols, the lotus, when shown with the pod, has a male and female sexual meaning. This is why many times Buddha is seated on a mandala, which is a different form of lotus made up of triangles. To find Buddha, one must penetrate the center of the mandala. When dealing with symbolism, you will find it always has sexual significant meaning. Everything in the occult relates back to sex. Aleister Crowley was an enlightened one. He was possessed by demons. That is what it means to be enlightened, to have a spirit guide. Charles Manson was another enlightened Buddhist. Everyone remembers this picture showing him with the Buddhist occult symbol on his face. The swastika, the Dharma wheel, and eternal knot are simply 8 and 6-pointed stars. Should not need much explaining, just as the dot between the eyes symbolizing the third eye. The eye of Horus is the eye of Lucifer. Now we know more about Buddhism. What about Hindu symbols? Just like the Romans, as it is a copy, Hindus have many deities. They even have a trinity called the Trimurti, including Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu. Shiva, often depicted as the baphomet, is with a large phylak. The phylak symbol is used in many Hindu icons and religious equipment. Shiva is typically accompanied by Nandi the bull. The mother goddess is Kali. Hinduism is much the same as Kabbalah. Many of the same ceremonies, mantras and rituals, including yoga, sex, magic, and tantras today, which were practiced by occultists long before Hindu religion came about. This is how the occult mind works. It does not matter the small differences in ceremonies, though there are few. The Hindus use the same equipment in the rituals as the Magi and the Zoroastrians and many other occults. Zeus is called Indra, king of sky. Both are responsible for weather. Their special weapon is the thunderbolt. Vulcan is a Roman god called Viswakarma in Hindu, designer and producer of weapons. Hera, the Roman goddess of wealth, is called Lakshmi. It does not matter the names they call the gods they worship. The deities in these religions are based off of the fallen angels who accompanied Lucifer in his exile here. They all led back to Lucifer, as he is the ruler of the fallen, and the father of deception.
Now let's look at Buddhism. This is Shakyamuni Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. Look at, here's the Buddha. Look at the top. This is called the peacock demon. And I actually asked a Buddhist what this deity was, and they named it the peacock demon. They know that it's a demon. Look, next is the Naga, or the snake beings. Look at the characteristics of this peacock demon. Red, female breasts, so androgynous, and I even confirmed this with a Buddhist monk. That is an androgynous being. Bird's head, bird's feet. Look at now Hinduism. Buddha was a Hindu, and therefore Buddhism has the same thing that Hinduism has. And you see all these serpents that represent wisdom. Of course, that is the lie. Here's the Naga themselves, and you can see now the snakes behind. This is very reminiscent of perhaps Medusa as well. Look at the fiery serpents, brazen serpents, and the description of these.
Easy to look at the idol and to think of itself as just a hunk of wood, a hunk of stone. It really isn't anything. It's an inanimate object. But Paul is saying here that it goes deeper than that. Because when they're bowing down to an idol, it's not that they're just worshiping an inanimate object, but that literally they are worshiping devils.
There are many other symbols, but we will continue on for now. Like most involved in a religion, the majority of people who call themselves Hindus or Buddhists know little of the history or depth of what they are involved in. People rarely look into things deep enough to know what they give their lives and souls to, even when they become adults accountable for their knowledge and actions. So those who know the truth behind these cults, as we exposed a bit here, are those in top leading positions, the leaders and devoted. But the fact still remains. All of these fake religions, Roman Catholic, Muslim, Hindu, Tao, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, Buddhism, all based on the same Luciferian principles, make all those people already under the one world new world order religion. Do not be deceived. Know your enemy. The truth will set you free. So Alexander the Great comes after Buddha has left. Rome destroyed the Persian Empire and penetrated the far northwest of India before his death in 317 BC. and 322 BC. Chandragupta Maurya became king of the powerful state of Magadha in the north of India. For more details and history on India, please see our site, as we have added much more info there for you. The elite beings are Zoroastrians, the Magi, the ones who practice magic, possession, had landed in Gujarat around 7 AD. We see all of the symbols and rituals in Hindu and many other Asian religions come directly from Zoroastrianism. The elite. Saint Thomas arrived in India in 52 AD, and the followers of Christ began creating communities where all who came sold all they had, leaving them owing no taxes or debts to the government, and built their own communities. There were no rulers. They lived in peace and anarchy. Here we see the Romans began to exterminate them by having mass crucifixions. The elite must have their money, their control over your life. The Olympic Games were created for this purpose. The Romans rounded up the communities and everyone was slaughtered in the arena. The Kushan Empire reached its peak under King Kanishka. During his reign, northern India was prosperous and did much trade with the Roman Empire, but it all crumbled away after he died. Like many of the empires of this region, the next Indian dynasties expanded to include Sri Lanka and Maldives, Ganges and Andaman Islands. Trade between the Arab nations and Asian territories grew. Turkish ruler Muhammad from 971 to 1030 conquered Afghanistan, then went to India, conquered Punjab, and the Delhi Sultanate began. 1237 we see the Mongols led by Batu Khan crossing the Urals from Asia into Russia. Prior to the 13th century, Russia was ruled by the Pannonians, who took over Kiev and made a new state on the Volga River and ruled there for 200 years. In 1290, the new emperor of Delhi in India, Alauddin Khalji, murdered his uncle Jalaluddin Firoz to gain the throne. All religious lands were confiscated and marriages between noble families were sanctioned by the king. The emperor also introduced market and price control for most essential products including food and cloth, among many other restrictions. Thus the emperor enforced a highly centralized system of government. In the next dynasty we see Muhammad Tughlaq, who introduced token currency and moved the capital from Delhi to Devagiri. In 1498, when Tamerlane, a descendant of Genghis Khan who created the Mughal Empire, sacked Delhi and massacred most of the inhabitants. You will notice many descendants of Khan in Indian rulers. At around the same time, another empire arose in the south, the Vijayanagara. The Vijayanagara Empire is named after its capital city. The rulers of Vijayanagara gradually consolidated their empire, reaching a peak in the 1500s. The last Lodi Sultan, Ibrahim Lodi, was defeated and killed by Babur in the First Battle of Panipat in 1526. With the fall of the Lodis, the Sultanate of Delhi also ended. Zahir Abdin Aka Babur Aka the Tiger, a descendant of Khan. From 1504 he was ruler of part of what is now Afghanistan. From the Turks he had learned to use cannons, which helped him defeat the Indian kings who were still using traditional methods of warfare. Babur first raided India in 1517 and in 1526 he crushed the army of Ibrahim Lodi at the Battle of Panipat. Other Indian rulers now united against Babur, but they were crushed at the Battle of Kanauj in 1527. In 1627 Shah Jahan became ruler. He is famous for building the Taj Mahal, a memorial to his queen Munat's Mahal. Work began on it in 1631 and it took 22 years to build. The next ruler, Aurangzeb, expanded the empire and banned repair of Hindu temples, banned religious buildings from being built unless they were Muslim. He introduced a religious tax as well. The Rothschilds formed the British East India Company in 1600 to produce and sell opium from India. In 1639 they established a trading base in India in what is now Chennai by sending out sea pirates in ships masked as merchants. The pirates began landing on the shores of India and started setting up armed forts at various places. The gold of India was stolen and taken to London. Britain started their drug agenda in 1715, followed by China in 1813 and the US shortly after. Today we call it the TPP. The funds gained by such trade were used to further the Jesuit order and the Roman Catholic Church. The VOC was the first international corporation with shares. It expanded their international drug cartel by shutting down anything outside the agreement. It created the commercialization of poppy harvesting for opium trade to China and Europe. The French moved into sections of India as Britain expanded there also. Eventually tensions between the two for power over the lands grew. During a 7-year war between France and Britain, the Bengal ruler ended with Britain gaining India, which it began colonizing. In 1803 the British took Agra and Delhi. At that time Delhi was still ruled by the last mile emperor. 1835 English was made the official language in India. In China 1839 the emperor has appointed Lin Tschsu commissioner of Canton to help fight the drug war they were having at the time. The terror group of the day was the Triad Gang. The British Jesuit Church of England funded and created group. Triad Society is also known as the Society of Heaven and Earth. During this time Britain started its decades-long series of opium wars with China. Freemasonry had established sufficient inroads within Japan by the 1800s. The elite decided to overthrow the shogunate and bring Japan under their control, where it has been ever since. The Rothschilds' President Millard Fillmore sent Commodore Matthew Galbraith Perry sailing into Yokohama, Japan. Commodore Perry was the father-in-law of Auguste Belmont, the Rothschilds' agent in America at that time. Auguste Belmont was the illegitimate son of Baron Carl Meyer Rothschild of the Rothschild branch in Naples, Italy, and married to Caroline Perry. January 1852, the Commodore was ordered to proceed to Washington and report to the Secretary of the Navy without delay. He had, as August Belmont wrote his foster father, a very honorable and respectable command over the greatest fleet which was ever appointed in peace times to an American Commodore. Namely, he is going with 6 battleships to East India, China and Japan, and, in addition to being the commander of the fleet, also has a diplomatic mission. But that mission was to open Japan to Western trade. Since then the Rothschilds have owned Japan, controlling it through the Japan Post Bank. Governments do not rule a country, bankers do. A century later, in 1973, David Rockefeller created a group of the world's power brokers of North America, Western Europe and Japan to work together, outside of any official governmental or political allegiance. They launched under the guise of working together to solve the world's problems, a entity that nice keyword of the time it seems was solve together. Today the keywords are friendship, unity, peace. The British in India now had more Indian military personnel than British military. In 1857 the soldiers of India rose up against the British. The soldiers in Madras and Bombay were loyal to Britain, so the British regained control by 1858. To appease the Indian people who did not want British control, the British told them no longer were they owned by the East India Company but the Crown, which is the Corporation of London owned by the Rothschilds. Most people think the Crown means the Queen of England. That is why they call it deception. The British also created an Indian National Congress and a Muslim League. Most members were British as they had to be appointed by a government. British rule created a total destruction of the society that used to be bringing in trains and communications technologies. Britain turned India into a factory. Companies like BP, Shell Oil and others that are owned by the Crown and have partnered with China and Russia. In 1862, Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar of the Mughal dynasty died in exile in Burma. In 2009, a powerful trust, founded by Muhammad Shahid Khan and Professor Aslam Pervez among other influential Muslim academics, businessmen and one of India's leading Urdu poets have joined forces to establish how many Mughals remain, and seek the return of the last emperor. Around 1891, China Li Tsongzhen went to the Guangxi Military Elementary School. In 1925, Li and two allies beat the other minor warlords and won control of Guangxi province. Member of the KMT and the Illuminati sect in China, we can see many in the Li line in similar positions. Selling opium, organizing gambling, taxing prostitution, and legal businesses, as well as printing their own money on crude duplicating machines. Shortly after Japan's war with Russia broke out in February 1904, the Rothschild-owned government appointed Takahashi Korekiyo its financial representative, to sell Japanese treasury bonds to capitalists in London. Sound familiar? They always play both sides and make cash on every war. Takahashi traveled London on the 1st of April. He met with many of the most important London bankers and financiers of the time, including Lord Revelstoke John Baring, the top officials of Persuasion Bank, which is now part of the Royal Bank of Scotland Group and had ties with Japan dating from the 1880s. Sir Ewan Cameron of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, William Cock and Arthur Francis Levito of Panmure Gordon, Sir Marcus Samuel and W. Foote Mitchell of Samuel, Carl Meyer and Otto Kahn. On the 12th of April, Takahashi recorded this in Diary of 1904. Mr. Shand came to see me afternoon on my request, and we talked about the form of Treasury bill and of the means of making good feelings of Cameron and Rothschild. On the 13th of April he met with both Rothschilds, Nathaniel and Alfred, at their office. On the 22nd of April, Takahashi wrote that he had met with a man named H.R. Beaton, recommended that he enlist the help of Sir Ernest Castle, banker to the king, and along with Lords Revelstoke and Rothschild. Takahashi reported Beaton as saying, Jews are the first-rate financier, and Castle is most influential in London. He can invite Rothschild as well as Morgan and so on. The same day Sir Marcus Samuel called on Takahashi and told him he can enlist Rothschild after the war. On the 7th of March 1907 Rothschild reported, "The Japanese are a remarkable nation. They have proven themselves on land and sea, and their financial representative Mr. Takahashi deserves the highest praise for having placed the finance of the country on so firm and stable a basis. All preparations are made for the Japanese loan and the prospectuses will be issued this afternoon, and judging from appearances I expect the loan to be a great success." Through a series of complex maneuvers within the banks, the Rothschilds made huge profits from the war. The stage was set in 1898 when Britain and China signed a contract stipulating that Hong Kong would be handed back to the Chinese in 1997. This forced the two worlds, capitalism and communism, to merge as they are today. The merge did not happen until Deng Xiaoping came to power in the late 1970s. The government had to get guidance from the wealthiest Chinese tycoons in Hong Kong to bail the country out. Who is behind the richest men in Hong Kong? The British, naturally. Hong Kong is owned by the Crown, which is the Rothschild family. Today China's banks, HSBC, Bank of China and others, working with JP Morgan Chase Bank, rule the precious metals markets, gold, silver, platinum, and more. China's petroleum corporations have grown over Western oil companies like Chevron, Shell and BP that have operated in the global markets for over a century. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley and other Rothschild banks have worked with Beijing to construct over 100,000 warehouses located throughout China. These warehouses are packed with stores of expensive materials: wood and lumber, aluminum, iron ore, steel, tin, concrete, brick, glass, tractors, earth-moving equipment, tools, and much more. If any area is prepared for World War III, it is China. In a report on China published in 1920, Lord Bertrand Russell wrote, "Out of the Renaissance spirit now existing in China, it is possible, if foreign nations can be prevented from wreaking havoc, to develop a new civilization better than any that the world has yet known." The people of India were in a frustrated state, and in 1919 armed British soldiers murdered 350 unarmed people who had formed a rally. Enter Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, a devoted Jain follower. M.K. Gandhi slept naked with young girls, including his nieces. Typical pedo elitescum. He worked for Britain in London during World War I and was Sergeant Major by 1916 after begging to be put in war against the Zulu. He described Africans as 1 degree removed from animals. He wanted very much for the Indian population to be seen as the superior race. As a lawyer in South Africa, he watched riots and became influential in military and political matters. He learned the art of deception and hid well under the cover of nonviolence and his ability to speak well and manipulate emotions. So in 1920 this lawyer launched a non-cooperation campaign against the British. In 1930 the Dandi March began to end the government's monopoly of salt production. Gandhi led a march to the sea to collect salt. Gandhi and tens of thousands of others were arrested. When released the next year, the people were allowed to make their own salt. Many such arrests and protests were done in Gandhi's name. This helped subdue the population and kept everyone subdued with the illusion that peace can be a weapon against those who do not want it. William Francis Doherty, a white American, was murdered by Gandhi's followers and was quickly covered up by Gandhi himself. December of 1937 until January 1938 the Japanese were in the middle of a war with China. They reached Nanking, the capital of the Republic of China. Soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army murdered Chinese civilians and committed many atrocities. The complete death toll is unknown, but is over 470,000 human beings and institutionalized rape of 205,000 children and women. Soldiers would go from door to door, searching for girls, with many being captured and gang-raped. The women were often killed immediately after being raped, often through explicit mutilation or by penetrating vaginas with bayonets, long sticks of bamboo, or other objects. Young children were included and cut open to allow Japanese soldiers to rape them. Robert Wilson, an American working at a hospital in the safe zone, wrote in his diary about the incidents. Let me recount some instances occurring in the last 2 days. Last night the house of one of the Chinese staff members of the university was broken into, and 2 of the women, his relatives, were raped. 2 girls, about 16, were raped to death in one of the refugee camps. In the university middle school, where there are 8,000 people, the Japs came in 10 times last night, over the wall, stole food, clothing, and raped. Until they were satisfied, they bayoneted one little boy of 8 who had 5 bayonet wounds, including one that penetrated his stomach. A portion was outside the abdomen. I think he will live. Last night up to 1,000 women and girls are said to have been raped. About 100 girls at Kinling College alone. You hear nothing but rape. If husbands or brothers intervene, they are shot. What you hear and see on all sides is the brutality and bestiality of the Japanese soldiers. Decapitation, crucifixion. Soldiers carved out big pieces of human flesh and gouged out eyes and noses and ears. The Japanese troops gathered groups of people, stripped them naked, tied them up to columns, and then stabbed them with special needles with handles on them, all over their bodies, including their mouths, throats, and eyes. People had their hands frozen solid and then closed in a doctor, breaking it to pieces. Babies were sliced in half or in quarters with bayonets while the parents were forced to watch. By 1940 in India, the British policy of divide and conquer led to the demand of a separate Muslim state. The British responded by imprisoning National Congress leaders and other freedom fighters. In 1946 the Viceroy appointed an interim cabinet with Jawaharlal Nehru as Prime Minister, but by then the leader of Muslim League, Jinnah, had declared a day of action. On the 16th of August 1946, the declaration led to unprecedented violence between Hindus and Muslims in Calcutta. Soon after, Viceroy Mountbatten agreed to the formation of Pakistan and Bangladesh. Manmohan Gandhi had come in 1942 under house arrest to look after Gandhi's dying wife. In 1946, age 77, Gandhi received his 17-year-old grandniece as his mistress and MK slave. According to her diaries, Gandhi, who was referred to as Mother, experimented on her sexually. He supervised her education, her food, dress, rest, and sleep, for closer supervision and guidance. He made her sleep in the same bed with him. She was his personal attendant, massaging and bathing him and cooking for him. In 1949 we see the bloody Mao Zedong, also known as Mao Tse-tung, the new puppet dictator of the People's Republic of China. Mao was a Soviet agent trained in Yale Skull and Bones in China, pulling the country into the elite control. They do what they do everywhere. They attacked traditional Chinese culture, instigated industrialization programs, created a common language, all in the name of unity. Wang Hao records a meeting between David Rockefeller and Mao's deputy Zhou Enlai in 1973. Zhou said that it was necessary to find appropriate methods conducive to the development of the trade between two sides under different political systems. Israel Epstein and Sidney Shapiro were the 2 Jesuit elite Jew handlers for Mao. Jiang Qing said, "Everything I did, Mao told me to do. I was his dog. What he said to bite, I bit." This proves the said fact that people think they are unable to change those in power. Sounds like what we heard from the Nuremberg trials about Hitler. Both puppet kings of the elite and used to puppet others. Warrants were placed on a group of men discovered to be plotting to kill Mao. Of the men who escaped China never to be arrested was Li Lu. In Mao Tse-tung's Red China, up to 100 million died. for upsetting the monarch or for simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. We have seen this in every fascist dictatorship through history. We see this God Emperor belief the people have in Kim Jong-il and his father before him, as well as in the 1920s Japan. Children were educated to think of the emperor as a god in the form of a human being. The Shinto religion encourages emperor worship, racism and military aggression. Shinto held the emperor to be divine, because he was deemed to be a descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu. During this time in Japan, around 1945, Dr. Shiro Ishii and Emperor Hirohito were creating superviruses to depopulate India. Only the flora and fauna would remain. All humans, specifically Indians, would die. Dr. Shiro Ishii worked in Unit 731. Maps show 76 different structures, laboratories, dissection rooms, barns, administrative buildings, autopsy dissecting building, special prison to house human test subjects, 3 giant furnaces for disposal of human carcasses, and dormitories for the 20,000 staff, serviced by its own airport and railway. Medical experiments were done in secret. They were particularly interested in germ warfare. The Chinese were infected with plagues, anthrax, cholera and other pathogens. They underwent frostbite, dehydration and malnutrition. Surgeries and transplantation of limbs at RST syphilis was injected. Then the Japanese decided they could study the effects better if the syphilis was contracted through sexual contact. Most people lasted only 30 days. But this was not the only event going on. The Japanese during this time were infecting cities and towns throughout China with diseases and plagues. Massive depopulation took place. Also, we see Black Pope of the Jesuits Pedro Arrup while in Japan was a key player in a false flag event. He was hidden in a secret bunker when Hiroshima was firebombed. Arrup and his novices miraculously appeared unharmed at Ground Zero. They created this false flag event to bring more Japanese into the church. Since they had always been against the Jesuits and the banking system, the Jesuits emphatically proclaimed they had been praying to Mary, not mentioning the secret and quite safe bunker they were in when the bombs fell and were saved by her. Media propaganda was spread wildly and the Japanese caved to Jesuit control. Magnesium-coated carpet bombs were used to create the bright flash of the explosion. Like the moon landing and every other false flag event, every picture, every video of the bombs were created by the Jesuits in Hollywood and claimed they were nuclear. The videos and pictures were not taken anywhere near Hiroshima or Nagasaki. The radiation stories were spread to create fear, which it has done successfully. At the time, the Jesuits needed their military sect, America, to be the military superpower. Shock and awe instills fear, which allows easy control. The radiation was a lie. The firebomb debris, which left no crater, no even buildings still standing, were cleaned up with no problem. None of this is possible with nuclear bombs. There were no deaf and blind survivors, which would have been most, if not all, if it had been nuclear. Cars, phones and everything else were still working and were never affected. So the Jesuits were able to create more money upon the expansion of the nuclear scheme. They did the same with NASA and programs like that. Just another way to take more of your money and put it in their underground caves. The pilot, Paul Tibbets, who dropped the A-bomb with his crew of 14, died in 2007 at the age of 92. No radiation issues for him. He ran the National Crisis Center at the Pentagon. The other pilot who dropped the other bomb also survived the bomb and died at age 88 in 2009 with no radiation issues. Nuke bombs are not real. It is fear porn. India and Pakistan became independent as dominions under Britain on the 15th of August 1947, but violence continued to break out in areas mixing Muslims and Hindus. Almost 500,000 people died in the violence. In 1948, Gandhi was shot 3 times and killed by militant Hindu RSS member named Nathuram Godse. We have all seen the JFK patsy assassins before, so this seems no different. Since the partition of British India in 1947 and creation of modern states of India and Pakistan, the 2 South Asian countries have been involved in 4 wars, including one undeclared war and many border skirmishes and military standoffs. During this time, Aristotle Socrates Onassis of the Roman tribes was born and came to be the next godfather of the Asian opium trade through the Golden Triangle. About this time, U.S. State Department issued a plan to disarm all nations and arm the United Nations. Document number 7277 is entitled Freedom from War, the program for general and complete disarmament in a peaceful world. It details a 3-stage plan. They lock things in 3s. The final stage, in which no state would have the military power to challenge the progressively strengthened UN peace force. You see, in March 1957, a small group had come up with a very detailed plan on how to acquire their own airline in order to smuggle even more opium around the world. Unable to use commercial airlines in USA any longer, they noticed Howard Hughes. His stonewall for the commercial control over his airline made him the perfect target. The plan fell together and Onassis was the executor. Onassis had Howard Hughes kidnapped from his bungalow at the Beverly Hills Hotel using Hughes' own men. Hughes was shot full of heroin for 30 days and later dragged to a cell on Onassis Island, Skerpiog. Onassis now has more power in the U.S. with the Hughes empire already controlled Nixon and other Hughes-purchased politicians. Hughes double-played him out for years. When JFK found out about this once his brother had died, he rose up. JFK and Bobby planned to attack the elite. They arrested Wally Bird, who owned the Air Thailand, the line used for shipping Onassis opium under CIA's Air Opium program. They arrested Mafia man Jimmy Hoffa and declared the $73 million in fake Hughes land leads, deposited them with SF Bank of America, which declared them forgeries. Onassis put up an elite team of assassins to murder Castro since JFK wasn't going with the plan. JFK and Bobby set up a justice team and arrested the assassins. Onassis was beyond enraged, as you can imagine, and turned the assassins onto JFK, who created the Group of 40. JFK's assassination was going to take place as a triple execution, together with Demon Dan HU in Vietnam. Demon Dan HU were whacked on schedule. This is not the only thing going on with JFK that would have gotten him murdered. If one plot didn't work, the next wave would come. Another person who found out about the earlier deal between Joseph Kennedy and Onassis, Senator Estes Kefauver, planned a speech on the Senate floor exposing the mafia operations and the members. Onassis, Kennedy, Eugene Meyer, Lansky, Roosevelt and the others. The senator ate a piece of apple pie laced with sodium morphate, poison, and had a heart attack on the Senate floor. There is no such thing as freedom of speech. In 1971, President Richard Nixon declared war on drugs. He proclaimed, "America's public enemy number 1 in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive." This helped bring in free enterprise, the umbrella the drug business hides under. Billions and billions go missing and are unaccounted for. They go through Shanghai banks with shipments of drugs through Hong Kong. We must stop kidding ourselves that drugs are a problem. There is no drug problem besides the elite. They create the drugs, program you into being dependent on them, make most of their income on drugs, and always have, particularly opium, and disperse it through the United States and all around the world. Samuel Morse wrote, "As long as this country maintains its drug traffic, there is not the slightest possibility that it will ever become a military threat, since the habit saps the vitality of the nation." in 1835 under the pen name Brutus. So in all likelihood, whatever it is you are addicted to was the government's goal in order to control you easier. However, you have the control and the power to stop. The war on drugs is simply a war on you. In China, June 4, 1989, a massacre is caused by a power struggle between Li Peng and Cao Ziyang. Protesters were in the streets on hunger strikes in order to create a communist party without corruption that would allow freedom of press and freedom of speech. The strikes went on in 400 cities, and as planned, martial law was imposed and 300,000 troops were sent to one city alone under Li Peng's orders. Li had a multitude of troops with assault rifles and tanks open fire on unarmed civilians trying to block the military advance. The exact number of those killed is unknown, except that it is above 10,000 innocent citizens. Li Peng's daughter, China's power queen, Li Xiaolin, who holds the Chinese side of the elite bloodline, Li Ka-shing in Hong Kong, the gateway of opium trade, has a vast empire, which is easy to find in oil and utilities. The Li lineage has also created secret, secure banks strictly for opium trades within the elite. Li Ka-shing, Asia's richest man at $31.9 billion in 2014, has two sons, Victor and Richard, soon to take over the empire. Lee Kuan Yew, who graduated from Cambridge with elite connections and of course member of various clubs, became dictator of Singapore and ruled for decades. Today, India, with a population of around 1.5 billion people, is 14% Muslim and 79% Hindu. Muslims have been attacked because of their consumption of beef, as the religious propaganda has been increased thanks to Modi, and people have become agitated. To Hindus, the bull is still considered sacred. Over 1,000 people have been killed because of anti-Muslim riots. Let us look at the leader. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was born the 17th of September 1950. Since he was 8 years old, he was indoctrinated in the exclusively male organization dedicated to propagating the political ideology of Hindutva called RSS. The group, inspired by the German and Italian fascist parties, promotes an exclusionary Hindutva ideology, envisioning a Hindu India in which non-Hindus are second-class citizens. He has a militaristic and aggressive conception of Hindu masculinity. Sexualized violence and the control of women are central aspects in the construction of this masculinity and the Sangh Parivar ideology he was raised in. In 1992, Modi was involved in a bloody attack that destroyed a mosque. In 2002, Modi was involved with anti-Muslim violence which left over 2,000 people were killed. During this time, the group also started systematically raping, torturing and murdering Muslim women and girls. Women and young girls were gang-raped, paraded naked in public, had instruments inserted into their bodies, were subjected to sexual assaults, had their breasts cut off, their vaginas and wombs sliced open, and were beaten up with rods and pipes. Pregnant women were cut open and fetuses hung up on three-pronged trishulls, tridents, the three-pronged staff of Zeus, Neptune, and more, who are Lucifer, and serves a symbolic Hindu religious function. In one case, several eyewitnesses testified that a pregnant woman was raped, tortured, and her womb then slit open with a sword to disgorge the child inside, which was then hacked to pieces and burned with the mother. In another case, a 3-year-old girl was raped and killed in front of her mother. This is hardly a complete list of what this man has done, but we must continue. When he was 16, he severed contact with his family. Though married at the age of 18, he has next to no contact with his wife. They have never consummated their marriage. He is the second most followed world leader on Twitter. His polls were obviously controlled, as the Rothschild voting machines showed large numbers of Muslims backing his party. A Hindu nationalist, a militant right-wing culture organization, who wants to put the Hinduism into the Indian constitution. He is a fascist, and like every puppet, he rose quickly through the ranks of his club to where he is today. Gang rape is widespread in the Hindu and Muslim worlds alike. When humans are not considered equal, violence and abuse will happen on those weakest. In such a mindset, in such a culture, in such a community, no true love exists and no human bond can form. Humanity is dead because of ignorance. Rape is seen as proving the masculinity of the Hindu and Muslim man. No religion is free of abusers. The corruption goes far deeper than what we expose here, but can be found on the site. Black Pope Nicholas Bacon joined the Jesuits in 1953 and was made a priest on March 17, 1967. He was elected the Black Pope on January 19, 2008. Like the former Spanish Black Pope Pedro Arrup, Bacon is fluent in several languages and has lived most of his life in Japan working with the poor in Asia. The elites have always had their hands in Asia, which is the other side. The great poet Henry Breakspear resides in Macau, China today. Emperor Hirohito of the 2,600-year-old Chrysanthemum dynasty died in 1989. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been a member of the imperial cult Nipponkaji since the 90s. The imperial cult strives to restore absolute monarchy. Nipponkaji is a small elite cult which includes a number of the country's most powerful people. They follow a brand of Shintoism dating before and during World War II. This cult elevates the emperor to the status of a god. Nipponkaji, also called Japan Conference, was formed in 1997 and its major tenets are the elimination of Japan's constitution, the end of equality between the sexes, the expulsion of foreigners, rejection of human rights laws, and the restoration of Japan's imperial glory realized during and after the Meiji era. The typical elite plan, in line with fellow members of his imperial and imperialist cult. Abe has said the revision of the Constitution is his lifetime goal, writes J. Kadelstein and Mari Yamamoto. Abe and his party, at least the extremist factions, are at last coming very close to that goal. Has secured passage of a bill that grants the government sweeping powers to declare state secrets. Japan is ever increasingly nervous about China's militarism in its sea. Deals with India will lead to deals with China and secure Japan. If it were not secure already, hostilities are likely to soon occur throughout the entire Sea of Japan region. SVR states is directly related to North Korea supposed hacking the autopilot controls of a massive container ship, then crashing it into a U.S. Navy destroyer, killing at least 7 American sailors. Of course, as we knew years ago, the hacking and cyber fear will be escalated. They have to control the internet. They have to control our mind and speech. They must have their mark of authority on you. They can only do this with your consent. In 2005, Chinese diplomat Chen Yonglin defected and exposed the operations of the Chinese consulate in Sydney, Australia, as well as similar CCP front operations being run in the United States, Canada, Hong Kong, Taiwan and in many other countries. Chen said at the time, "It is a pyramid-like structure and system. They manipulate Chinese people in the name of Unite Overseas Chinese." He detailed how the CCP uses Chinese student groups as special agents, how it influences overseas media using advertisements from Chinese companies, and how it pressures foreign politicians. The CCP controls overt spy departments, which are mainly run under its United Front Work Department and its Overseas Chinese Affairs Office. The Australian Research Council is funneling Australian taxpayer funds into research with applications to China's advanced weapons capacity through its linkage program, wrote the Australian Reporter June 10, 2017. Australia has sent a $400,000 grant for a research at University of Adelaide and the Beijing Institute of Aeronautical Materials, which is part of the Aviation Industry Corporation of China, the main supplier of military aircraft. The Australian Research Council also gave $466,000 to a joint research program between the University of New South Wales and Chinese telecom company Huawei, which is linked to the third department of the play, the military's cyber espionage arm. One statement remains true. The Chinese people would revolt against overt foreign domination, but embrace their place in the New World Order if they believed they were in control. In the Koreas we saw Luciferian Ban Ki-moon taken from the United Nations chief position to be the leader of South Korea after the leader there was exposed in an email scandal identical to that of Hillary Clinton. In North Korea we see the Illuminati puppet Kim Jong-il, who was raised in an elite school in Switzerland like his father, where most of the political leaders are raised in the elite ideology of totalitarian one world order. North Korea is a perfect example of exactly what the elite want the rest of the world to be. Everything is under total control. During Obama's visit to India in January 2, 2015 with India's Modi, two goals were met. First, to pull India out of BRICS, and secondly, to use India as a test case for global demonetization. Following the orders of the elite Rothschilds, Rockefellers and Morgans, the anti-cash partnership called Operation Catalyst, Inclusive Cashless Payment Partnership, was created. Modi forced everyone to turn in 501,000 rupee notes by the end of 2016. Modi only allowed people with bank accounts, of course, to replace a maximum of 4,500 rupees of notes for cash. Anything more than that has to be deposited, thus forcing people to either pay taxes or render their private savings, some for countless generations, absolutely worthless, and anyone retaining 2,500,000 rupees, approximately $3,500, will be criminally prosecuted. Houses have been raided and jewelry and gold have been confiscated. 600 million donatee even have a bank account, and 300 million people donatee have government identification. Donatee think this will not happen in your country soon. India will see massive depopulation in the next couple of years, as many are already starving and sick. None of Modi's claimed ambitions are possible without heavy British involvement. In 2016 Modi visited Japan and their Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. They made a civil nuclear cooperation pact. They finalized one of the first military sales Japan has made since lifting a 50-year-old export ban on arms sales 2 years ago. India was set to buy 12 rescue waterplanes from Japan. Sir James Pavan states, "I expect to see India do internationally over the coming years is what my country also does, pursue action with the rest of the international community to advance our collective interests and make this a better world for all. We in Britain think India is and will be a responsible player on the world stage, a force for good, for stability and prosperity. That's why my government is and will remain a strong supporter of India's permanent membership of the UN Security Council." Turkish President Erdogan made a speech during his visit to India noting how the poor East is catching up with the rich West and emphasizing that eastern and southern counties must have equal representation in all institutions, especially the United Nations. Erdogan's statements in India condemning Western colonialism and India's emergence under the leadership of philosophers and politicians like Mahatma Gandhi give important clues about the New World Order. He stated that the European and American-centric political and economic order that was established after World War II no longer meets the needs of humanity today. Stating these things about the New World Order in India is interesting to say the least. We hope those of you who lean towards the Asian persuasion will now see more the reality of the other hand of the elite, the hand of order. Do not be deceived. The Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, Finland are also moving towards cashless societies, meaning literally everybody outside the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that includes China, Russia, most of Central Asia, Iran, Pakistan and India, is an apparent candidate to join this co-alliance. Converting the entire world economy to solely digital transactions is not just about extracting more tax revenue from the ruled populations. It is about knowledge and power. It is about surveillance on an extraordinary scale. The One World Order's cashless agenda is about acquiring the capacity to monitor literally every single financial transaction that takes place on the planet. The New World Order is being established by the recovery of the world's poor states. Keyword: friendship.
In order to ensure the security and continuing stability, the Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire for a safe and secure society.
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
Expect it.